Imagine a young boy's first solo flight, a moment of pure excitement that suddenly shifts into confusion and fear. For Ethan, what should have been a simple adventure becomes a test of courage and resilience when he faces unexpected challenges in the air and on the ground. Along the way, he meets unexpected allies and mentors who change his life forever, guiding him toward his dream of becoming a pilot. Through heartwarming encounters and life-changing lessons, Ethan's journey becomes about more than just reaching his destination. It's about discovering the power of kindness, bravery, and the importance of lifting others up. If you're ready for a story that soars above and beyond, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments which moment in Ethan's journey speaks to you most. Now, join us as we follow Ethan's path from uncertainty to a legacy that truly takes flight. Ethan Blake woke up that morning before his alarm went off, his heart racing with excitement. Today was the day. Today, he'd finally be taking his first solo flight to visit his grandparents in California. The room around him was still dark, just a faint sliver of light from the street lamp outside, casting a soft glow across his walls. Ethan lay still for a moment, letting the excitement build as he stared at the ceiling. He'd been dreaming of this day for months, ever since his parents had surprised him with the idea as a 10th birthday present. The idea of flying across the country all by himself felt like stepping into one of his favorite adventure books, like becoming one of the brave young heroes he read about. But now that the day had arrived, he also felt a flicker of nerves. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes as he tried to shake off the morning drowsiness. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 5:47 a.m. His mom, Carla, had promised they'd leave by 7 o'clock to give them plenty of time to get through the airport. But Ethan couldn't wait another second. He sprang out of bed, tugging on his clothes and glancing around his room to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything important. On his desk sat his small black backpack, already packed carefully the night before with all his essentials. Snacks, a bottle of water, his toy airplane, and his book about famous aviators. Nestled on top of the book was his prized possession, a tiny silver pendant shaped like an airplane, a gift from his grandfather who had once been a pilot himself. Ethan grabbed the pendant, turning it over in his hand as he felt its cool metal warmth him. The pendant had been a constant reminder of the bravery he wanted to have, just like his grandpa, who had always encouraged his love of flying. It made him feel like he wasn't just a kid on his way to see his grandparents. He was an explorer, ready to conquer the skies. Downstairs, Carla was in the kitchen, brewing coffee and arranging a light breakfast for herself, her son, and Ethan's younger sister, Lily. She glanced up from the counter just as Ethan came bounding down the stairs, his backpack slung over his shoulder and a wide grin on his face. "Morning, early bird," she said with a smile, noting the excitement sparkling in his eyes. Carla's heart swelled with pride, but a small part of her also felt that familiar tug of worry. This was the first time her son would be flying on his own, and while she knew he was more than capable, the motherly part of her couldn't help but worry. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan said, his voice bright. "I think I checked my bag like 10 times. I have everything, Mom, even Grandpa's pendant." He held it up to show her, as if needing the reassurance himself. Carla chuckled, walking over and giving his shoulder a squeeze. "I'm glad, honey. Grandpa will be so proud when he hears about this adventure." She watched his face, noticing the blend of excitement and nerves. "Now, remember what we talked about. Be polite to everyone on the plane, listen to the flight attendants, and don't be afraid to ask questions if you need help." Ethan nodded eagerly. "I remember, Mom. I'll be on my best behavior. You don't have to worry about me." Carla gave him a soft smile, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I know you will, Ethan. But that's my job, to worry. You're my little man, and it's hard to see you go off on your own." They ate breakfast together in a quiet, comfortable silence, each of them caught in their own thoughts. As they finished, Carla gave Ethan's sister Lily a quick goodbye hug. She seemed only half aware of the farewell, absorbed in her coloring book, and she waved her brother off with a quick bye before getting back to her masterpiece. Carla and Ethan gathered their things, and as they headed out the door, Carla placed a hand on his shoulder. "You ready, world traveler?" Ethan grinned up at her, his eyes shining. "More than ready. The drive to the airport felt like a journey in itself. The morning sky was still a deep shade of blue, fading to a soft pink along the horizon as the sun prepared to rise. Ethan pressed his face to the window, watching the city blur past, the familiar buildings and streets that felt like a different world than the one he'd be entering. As they pulled up to the airport, Ethan felt a twinge of nervousness creep up on him. The airport was huge, bustling with people moving in all directions, each of them on their own journey. He clutched his pendant for reassurance, feeling the cool metal grounding him. He wasn't just here to catch a plane. He was about to embark on an adventure. Inside, they navigated the crowds, checked his luggage, and headed for the security line. Carla kept a reassuring hand on his shoulder, guiding him as they weaved through the airport's bustling terminals. The place was filled with sounds, people talking, carts rolling, and the faint announcements calling out flights and gates. It was like a whole other world, one that Ethan was eager to explore. When they reached the security checkpoint, Carla knelt down in front of him, her gaze filled with warmth and a touch of sadness. "This is it, Ethan," she said, holding his hands in hers. "Remember, you're going to be just fine. I'll be watching you go through security, and as soon as you land, I'll be waiting by the phone for your call." Ethan hugged her tightly, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. "I'll miss you, Mom, but don't worry. I've got Grandpa's pendant and my book. I'll be okay." Carla's eyes sparkled with pride as she kissed his forehead. "I know you will, honey. I'm so proud of you." She handed him his ticket, which hung from a bright green lanyard around his neck, marking him as an unaccompanied minor. As Ethan stepped into the security line, he waved back at his mom, watching her until she was just a small figure in the distance, her hands still raised in farewell. And then he was on his own. Once through security, Ethan followed the signs leading to his gate. His nerves felt a little more manageable now, and his excitement began to creep back in. He clutched his backpack straps, walking with as much confidence as he could muster as he scanned the gates, his eyes finally landing on gate 32B. He approached the gate, joining the line of passengers waiting to board. Each of them seemed absorbed in their own world, some talking quietly with family, others checking their phones, a few simply staring off into the distance, lost in thought. Ethan felt like he was part of a bigger adventure, surrounded by people who were each on their own journey. Standing by the gate entrance was a flight attendant named Patricia. She was dressed in a neat uniform, her hair pinned back, and a polite but distant expression on her face. As Ethan approached, she looked him over, her gaze lingering on his lanyard. "Where's your guardian?" she asked, her tone neutral but somehow dismissive. "Oh, I'm flying alone," Ethan replied, his voice bright. "My mom's at home, and I'm going to see my grandparents." Patricia's polite smile faded a little. She gave him a quick glance up and down, as if searching for something. "Well, make sure you follow all the instructions and don't cause any disruptions," she said, her tone suddenly brisk. Ethan nodded, trying to keep his smile steady, though he felt a small twinge of unease. He'd expected kindness, maybe even encouragement, but Patricia's tone felt like a bucket of cold water splashed over his excitement. He tried not to let it bother him. After all, his mom had told him that people sometimes had rough days. After a few minutes, the announcement came for boarding, and Ethan stepped onto the plane, his heart thumping with anticipation. He found his seat, a window seat just like he'd hoped, and carefully placed his backpack under the seat in front of him. He looked out the window, taking in the airport scene one last time. He was about to take his first flight alone, and despite the brief, cold exchange with Patricia, he felt ready. This was his adventure. He reached for his pendant, giving it a light squeeze, a reminder that he was carrying his family's love and encouragement with him. Little did Ethan know, this would only be the beginning of a journey that would change him forever. Ethan buckled his seatbelt, glancing around at the rows of seats filling up around him. Passengers were tucking bags into the overhead bins, getting settled, or pulling out their books and phones for the flight. He felt a thrill watching it all, knowing that this was his own journey and that he'd be soaring through the clouds before he knew it. As he took in the scene, a flight attendant appeared at the end of the aisle, pushing a cart with refreshments. She had a friendly, welcoming expression, and she made her way down the aisle, handing out water and small snacks. Ethan hoped she'd be the one assisting him if he needed anything, but when she got close to his row, he heard another, familiar voice, Patricia. "Excuse me, I'll handle this section," Patricia said, her tone cool and firm as she took over the cart. The friendly flight attendant glanced at her, a hint of surprise in her eyes, but she stepped aside, allowing Patricia to take charge. Patricia turned toward Ethan with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you need anything?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Could I have some water, please?" Ethan asked politely, his voice quiet. He felt a twinge of nervousness under her gaze, her expression making him feel like he'd done something wrong without realizing it. She poured him a glass of water, handing it over without a word, and moved on to the next row, her demeanor suddenly friendlier as she greeted the other passengers. Ethan sipped his water, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. His mom had told him to be polite and follow the rules, and he was doing just that. Maybe Patricia was just having a rough day. Outside his window, the runway stretched into the distance, the engines roaring to life as the plane prepared for takeoff. Ethan's heart raced with excitement, and he leaned toward the window, pressing his face against it to catch every detail as the plane started to move. As the wheels left the ground, he felt a rush of exhilaration. The buildings below began to shrink, the cars on the road becoming tiny specks, and soon, the landscape turned into a beautiful patchwork of greens and browns. This was what he'd been waiting for, the feeling of soaring through the sky, leaving the world behind and becoming part of something bigger. The plane leveled off, and Ethan relaxed into his seat, opening his book on aviation history. He lost himself in the pages, reading about pioneers of flight who'd made it their mission to conquer the skies. He imagined himself as one of them, navigating through clouds and exploring the world from above. But just as he was getting into his book, he felt a sudden presence beside him. He looked up to see Patricia standing there, her expression stern as she looked him over. Ethan quickly put his book down, glancing up at her expectantly. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharp, as if she'd caught him breaking a rule. Ethan felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I was just reading," he replied, his voice a little shaky. "My mom packed this book for me." Patricia's eyes flickered to the cover, and she gave a brief nod. "Well, keep it down and sit properly. You don't want to disturb the other passengers," she said, her voice loud enough that a few nearby passengers looked over curiously. Ethan quickly adjusted his posture, feeling the weight of their glances. He tucked his book back into his backpack, the excitement he'd felt earlier now dampened. He hadn't been making noise, but Patricia's tone made him feel like he'd done something wrong. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks as he slumped slightly in his seat, wondering why she was treating him so differently. Across the aisle, an elderly woman with a gentle face offered him a small smile, her gaze filled with kindness. She gave him an encouraging nod, as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. Ethan managed a faint smile in return, comforted by her presence. "Thanks," he whispered softly, though he wasn't sure if she'd heard. Trying to shake off the uncomfortable interaction, Ethan decided to focus on the view outside the window. The clouds drifted below the plane like fluffy, white islands floating in a sea of blue. He imagined himself as a pilot, guiding the plane with a steady hand, navigating through the endless sky. He pictured his grandpa sitting next to him, sharing stories of his own flights. Grandpa had once told him that flying was about more than just reaching a destination. It was about finding freedom, letting go of worries, and embracing the thrill of adventure. Ethan held on to those words, letting them fill him with a sense of calm. When the plane hit a small patch of turbulence, Ethan gripped the armrest, feeling his stomach do a small flip. He took a deep breath, trying to remember his mom's advice to stay calm. The plane steadied, and he released his grip, feeling a bit proud of himself for staying composed. As the flight continued, the same friendly flight attendant he'd noticed earlier passed by his row. She paused, noticing Ethan's thoughtful expression, and leaned over with a warm smile. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of relief at her kindness. "Yes, thank you," he replied, his voice more confident. "I'm just thinking about flying. My grandpa used to be a pilot." Her eyes brightened. "Really? That's wonderful. You must be very proud of him." She glanced at the small airplane pendant around his neck, recognizing it as a symbol of his love for flying. One day, you might be sitting up front as a pilot yourself." Ethan's spirits lifted as he considered her words. "I hope so," he said, his voice filled with determination. As she continued down the aisle, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite Patricia's harshness, there were still people who believed in him, who saw him as more than just a kid. The warmth from the flight attendant's words lingered, making him feel just a little braver. As the plane neared the halfway point of the flight, Ethan decided to take out his toy airplane from his backpack. It was a small model of his grandpa's favorite aircraft, with silver wings and a bright blue stripe along the body. He held it carefully, running his fingers over the smooth surface, finding comfort in its familiar shape. Just as he began to imagine himself piloting the tiny plane, he heard a familiar voice. "What are you doing now?" Patricia's voice cut through his thoughts like a gust of cold wind. Ethan looked up, startled. "I was just holding my toy plane," he explained, his voice small. "My grandpa gave it to me." Patricia's gaze narrowed. "Well, put it away and sit up properly," she said, her voice firm. "You don't want to be distracting the other passengers." Ethan felt his face turn red as he quickly slipped the plane back into his backpack, his heart sinking. He thought he was doing everything right, but Patricia seemed determined to find fault in everything he did. He sat up straight, his shoulders tense, and glanced around to see if anyone was watching. The elderly woman across the aisle gave him another gentle nod, her eyes filled with understanding. She leaned over, whispering softly, "Don't let it bother you, dear. Sometimes people have bad days. Just remember, you're here for your adventure." Ethan felt a small swell of courage return. "Thank you," he whispered back, his voice steadier. He held on to her words, letting them reassure him. He didn't need to let Patricia's attitude ruin his trip. He was here to experience something incredible, and he would do his best to focus on that. As the flight continued, Ethan tried to distract himself by looking out the window, watching the clouds drift by like islands in the sky. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the pilot's voice crackling over the intercom until a few words caught his attention. "Good afternoon, passengers," the pilot said, his voice calm and warm. "We'd like to extend a special welcome to one of our youngest travelers today, a young man by the name of Ethan Blake, who is flying solo for the first time." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he heard his name. Passengers around him glanced in his direction, some offering smiles or friendly nods. A few even gave him a quiet thumbs up, their expressions filled with encouragement. The elderly woman across the aisle clapped softly, and Ethan felt a wave of pride wash over him. For the first time since the flight began, he felt truly seen, not as a troublemaker, but as someone who was taking a brave step on his own. "Thank you," he whispered to no one in particular, a soft smile on his face as he took in the supportive gazes around him. For the rest of the flight, he felt lighter, his earlier worries melting away as he focused on the view outside, the kindness of the passengers, and the joy of his adventure. As the plane began its descent, Ethan's heart beat faster with excitement. He looked out the window, watching as the land below grew closer, the patchwork fields and cityscapes becoming clearer. This was it, he'd done it. His first solo flight, a journey that had challenged him in unexpected ways, but had also shown him how brave he could be. When the plane touched down and rolled to a stop at the gate, he felt a swell of pride, his excitement returning with full force. He'd conquered his fears, navigated the unknown, and discovered that he had the courage to keep going, even when things felt tough. As the passengers began to stand and gather their belongings, the elderly woman leaned over one last time, giving him a kind smile. "You did wonderfully, Ethan. Remember, no one can take this adventure away from you." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. He would carry her words with him, a reminder of the kindness he'd found along the way. With his backpack slung over his shoulder and his pendant resting against his chest, Ethan stepped off the plane, his eyes bright with excitement and pride. This was only the beginning, and he couldn't wait to tell his family about the adventure he'd just had. After disembarking from his first flight, Ethan felt both proud and relieved as he followed the signs in the bustling airport to his connecting gate. His mind raced with excitement as he thought about seeing his grandparents and telling them all about his first solo adventure. But as he approached the gate for his connecting flight, his heart sank when he spotted a familiar figure. Patricia, the same flight attendant from his previous flight, standing at the boarding gate with a rigid posture. She noticed him immediately, her expression unreadable as she waved him over with a curt gesture. Ethan approached slowly, clutching the strap of his backpack for reassurance. He could feel the spark of confidence he'd built on his first leg of the trip start to flicker out. "Good to see you again, Ethan," Patricia said, her voice lacking warmth. She looked him over briefly, her gaze landing on his bright red sneakers with a subtle frown. "Are you traveling alone for this leg as well?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied, keeping his voice polite. He tried to offer her a smile, hoping that maybe this time things would be different. Patricia, however, didn't return his smile. Instead, she gave a small sigh, glancing around as if she expected someone else to appear beside him. She checked his boarding pass, her fingers lingering on it as though she was reluctant to let him proceed. "Well," she said, her tone flat, "just make sure you're on your best behavior. And remember, if I have to come over more than once, you're causing a disruption." Ethan's heart sank. He hadn't done anything wrong, and he couldn't understand why Patricia was treating him this way. He nodded quietly, trying to focus on his goal of reaching his grandparents rather than the uneasy feeling in his chest. He took his seat on the plane, by the window again, and clutched his pendant, hoping for a smoother journey this time. As the plane began to board, Ethan looked out the window, trying to enjoy the view of planes and ground crew working below. He tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in his stomach, but Patricia's words kept echoing in his mind. He didn't want any trouble. He just wanted to enjoy his trip. Soon, the plane filled with passengers, and the familiar flight attendant from his first flight, Lily, approached his row. Her warm smile brought him a sense of relief. She greeted him with a friendly nod, noticing the worry in his eyes. "Everything all right, Ethan?" she asked softly. Ethan managed a small nod. "Yes, ma'am. I'm just ready to get there," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Good to hear. We're here if you need anything, okay?" Lily gave him an encouraging wink before moving to assist other passengers. Ethan felt a bit lighter, grateful for her kindness. Just as he settled back, Patricia's voice cut through the hum of conversations. "Ethan," she said, standing in the aisle with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. "Let's make sure we follow all the rules, all right?" Ethan blinked, unsure of what he'd done wrong. He gave her a small nod, mumbling a quiet, "Yes, ma'am," but the knot in his stomach tightened. He could feel the eyes of nearby passengers on him, some looking concerned, others confused. The plane began to taxi, and Ethan focused on the view out the window, hoping that once they were in the air, everything would calm down. But as they took off, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As the plane climbed higher, Ethan tried to lose himself in his book. He didn't want to attract any attention, so he kept as still and quiet as he could, hoping that Patricia would leave him alone. But not long after the plane leveled off, Patricia appeared again, her expression more severe than before. She stood over him, her voice sharp. "Ethan," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "I asked you to sit properly." Ethan looked up startled. I am sitting properly," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's gaze narrowed. "That's enough. I've had multiple issues with you, and I can't allow disruptions on this flight. You'll need to leave the plane at the next stop." Ethan's face went pale. "Leave the plane? But I haven't done anything wrong," he said, his voice wavering with fear and confusion. Several passengers nearby exchanged looks of surprise, and a few whispered to each other. The elderly woman from his first flight, now seated a few rows back, leaned forward, her face filled with concern. "He's been polite the whole time," she said, her voice steady. "I don't understand why he's being treated this way." Patricia didn't respond. Instead, she gave Ethan a stern look before turning and walking away. Ethan sat in stunned silence, his heart pounding as he tried to process what had just happened. He hadn't caused any trouble, but now he was being told he'd have to leave the plane. As the plane began its descent toward the connecting airport, Ethan felt small and helpless. His excitement about his trip had dissolved, replaced by a heavy sense of dread. He clutched his pendant, hoping that somehow this was all a misunderstanding. After the plane landed, Ethan was escorted off, his head hanging low as he walked through the terminal. He felt every curious glance from the people around him, each one adding to the weight on his shoulders. A staff member met him at the gate, her face soft with concern as she guided him to a quiet seating area. "Hi, Ethan," she said gently, kneeling down to his level. "I'm Melissa, and I work with the airline. I know you've had a difficult time, but we're going to get in touch with your mom, okay?" Ethan nodded, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "I didn't do anything wrong." Melissa offered him a comforting smile. "I believe you, sweetheart. Let's get your mom here, and we'll figure this out." Meanwhile, back at home, Carla had just finished cleaning up after lunch when her phone rang. Seeing the airport's number on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. She answered quickly, her voice filled with worry. "Hello, Mrs. Blake," came the calm voice of a staff member. "This is Melissa from the airline. I'm calling about your son, Ethan. He's safe, but we need you to come to the airport. There was an incident on the plane, and he was asked to leave." Carla's heart dropped. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is he all right?" "Yes, ma'am. He's safe and waiting here at the gate," Melissa reassured her. "We'll keep him company until you arrive." Carla didn't waste a second. She grabbed her keys and rushed out the door, her mind racing with a mix of worry and anger. She knew her son, knew how polite and well-behaved he was, and couldn't imagine what could have led to this. Her protective instincts took over, and she vowed to get to the bottom of what had happened. When Carla arrived at the airport, she spotted Ethan sitting alone, his shoulders slumped and his head down. Her heart ached at the sight of him, looking so small and defeated. She rushed over, kneeling beside him and pulling him into a hug. "Ethan, honey, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled with gentle concern. "Why aren't you on the plane?" Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "Mom, I don't know. The flight attendant, she kept telling me I was causing trouble, but I didn't do anything wrong. She said I had to leave the plane." Carla's chest tightened as she held him close, running a hand over his back. "I believe you, sweetheart. You've always been polite. I know you didn't do anything wrong." A few passengers from the flight walked past, recognizing Ethan and giving Carla sympathetic looks. One of them, the elderly woman who had defended Ethan, stopped beside them. "You have a very brave son, ma'am," she said, her voice kind. "He was polite the entire time. I don't understand why he was treated so harshly." Carla nodded, her eyes flashing with a quiet but fierce determination. "Thank you. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again." She hugged Ethan tightly, the weight of the situation settling over her. She could feel his small body trembling, and she whispered softly, "Don't worry, Ethan. We're going to sort this out." With Ethan's hand firmly in hers, Carla marched over to the airline counter, her expression resolute. The staff at the counter took one look at her and immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. "Excuse me," Carla said, her voice calm but steady. "I need to speak with a supervisor. I want to know why my son was removed from his flight without a proper reason." The airline representative nodded quickly, her face filled with sympathy. "Of course, ma'am. Please have a seat, and I'll call a supervisor right away." Carla gave Ethan a reassuring smile, squeezing his hand as they sat down to wait. Inside, she felt a simmering anger, but she knew she needed to stay calm for her son's sake. She could sense the sadness and confusion radiating from him, and she wanted nothing more than to protect him. Within a few minutes, a man in a suit approached them. He introduced himself as Daniel Harris, the airline supervisor on duty. His face was serious as he listened to Carla's account of what had happened, watching as she described how much this trip had meant to Ethan and how devastated he was by the treatment he'd received. Daniel's expression softened as he glanced down at Ethan, who was clutching his backpack tightly. "Mrs. Blake, I'm truly sorry for what happened. This is not how we treat our passengers, especially young travelers. I promise you, we'll look into this thoroughly." Carla's voice was firm as she replied, "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I just want to understand why this happened. My son deserves to be treated with respect, just like any other passenger." Daniel nodded, his face growing more serious. "I understand, and I'll be reviewing the security footage from the flight and speaking to the crew involved. We take these matters very seriously. He turned to Ethan, his voice kind. Ethan, I'm very sorry for what you went through. We'll arrange a new flight for you, and I'll make sure this experience doesn't happen again. Ethan managed a small nod, his expression a mix of relief and lingering sadness. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. Daniel offered him a warm smile. You're welcome, Ethan. And don't worry, we'll make sure this flight is a good experience for you. As Carla and Ethan sat together in the quiet waiting area, the atmosphere felt heavy with unresolved tension. Carla kept an arm around her son's shoulders, whispering comforting words and reassuring him that they would make things right. She could see that Ethan was still shaken, his usual excitement and spark dimmed. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder, his voice small. Mom, do you think they'll let me fly again? Carla took a steadying breath, forcing herself to sound confident. Of course they will, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong, and you deserve to finish your trip. Mr. Harris said he'd make sure you got to your grandparents safely, remember? Ethan nodded, but she could tell he was still holding on to the fear and confusion from his experience. Carla tightened her grip on him, feeling a surge of determination. Whatever it took, she would make sure he understood that his voice mattered, that he didn't deserve to be treated unfairly. After a few minutes, Daniel Harris returned, his expression serious. He sat across from Carla and Ethan, leaning forward as he spoke. Mrs. Blake, Ethan, I've spoken with the crew members, and I'm in the process of reviewing footage from the flight. We want to ensure we understand exactly what happened, and I'll be looking at every detail. He turned to Ethan, offering a gentle smile. We're going to get you on a new flight soon, Ethan. I'll personally make sure you have a better experience. Carla looked at him, her gaze steady. Thank you, Mr. Harris. But I also want to know how this was allowed to happen. My son is polite and well-behaved. If he was treated unfairly, I want to make sure the person responsible is held accountable. Daniel nodded, his expression resolute. Absolutely, Mrs. Blake. We're committed to finding out the truth, and I'll be in touch with you as soon as we have more information. Carla thanked him, and as Daniel stood up, he gave Ethan an encouraging nod. Hang in there, kid. You're braver than you know. Ethan managed a small smile, and Carla felt a sense of hope. She could see that Daniel genuinely cared and that he was taking their situation seriously. Once they arrived home that evening, Carla was too wound up to relax. She could see that Ethan was emotionally drained, so she encouraged him to take a bath and get into his pajamas. As he settled in, she noticed his hand resting on his silver airplane pendant, a subtle gesture that showed he was still trying to hold onto his dream of flying. With Ethan safe and comfortable, Carla sat down with her laptop and opened social media. She started typing, her words carefully chosen as she shared what had happened to Ethan. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She wanted accountability. As she typed, her message became a call for kindness, for the importance of treating every passenger, especially children, with respect and understanding. Within an hour, her post began gaining traction. Friends, family, and even strangers commented with words of support, expressing outrage and sympathy. Some parents shared their own stories of traveling with children, their voices echoing the same sentiment. Fairness, respect, and kindness were non-negotiable. Carla felt a surge of encouragement from the outpouring of support. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her son. She had become part of a larger conversation about kindness and accountability. And as she clicked through the comments, she made a promise to herself that she wouldn't stop until Ethan's story was fully heard. The next day, Daniel Harris met with a senior security officer in a quiet office at the airport, prepared to review the footage from Ethan's flight. The video showed each interaction between Ethan and Patricia, clearly capturing her repeated, unwarranted reprimands. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched the scenes unfold, the tension in Ethan's expression, and the way Patricia seemed to single him out while maintaining a polite demeanor with other passengers. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of disappointment and resolve. He knew the trust of young travelers was something they couldn't afford to lose, and watching Ethan's experience play out on screen made him even more determined to make things right. After reviewing the footage, he called Patricia into his office, prepared to discuss her conduct. Patricia entered, her expression neutral as she took a seat across from him. Daniel maintained his professionalism, but his voice was firm as he addressed her. Patricia, I've reviewed the footage from Ethan Blake's flight. I want to understand why you singled him out for behavior that didn't warrant disciplinary action. He wasn't being disruptive, yet you repeatedly reprimanded him. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flickering to the side. He was just acting differently from other children. I thought he might need more guidance. Guidance? Daniel's tone was incredulous. Guidance doesn't include making a young traveler feel alienated or forcing him to leave the plane. I expect our staff to offer support, not intimidation. Patricia's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. I'm sorry if I was too strict, sir. I thought I was doing what was best. Daniel shook his head, his voice resolute. Your actions went beyond strict, Patricia. Effective immediately. I'm placing you on suspension, pending further investigation. We're committed to creating a positive experience for all passengers, and this behavior doesn't reflect our values. Patricia's shoulders slumped, and she left the office without another word. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of responsibility. He knew the airline needed to rebuild trust, not only with Carla and Ethan, but with all families who counted on them for safe and respectful travel. That evening, Daniel called Carla to share the results of his investigation. Mrs. Blake, he began, his voice respectful. I wanted to inform you that we've taken immediate action. After reviewing the footage, it was clear that Ethan's treatment was unwarranted, and the flight attendant responsible has been placed on suspension. Carla felt a wave of relief. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I appreciate how seriously you're taking this. We're committed to making things right, Daniel continued. We'd like to offer Ethan a new flight, free of charge, along with extra support to ensure his comfort. Additionally, if you and Ethan are open to it, we'd love for him to share his story with our team as a reminder of the importance of empathy and respect. Carla glanced over at Ethan, who had been listening quietly, his expression a mix of hope and lingering sadness. She looked back at Daniel, her voice gentle. I'll discuss it with him, Mr. Harris. Thank you for the opportunity. After ending the call, Carla sat beside Ethan, her heart swelling with pride for her son. Ethan, Mr. Harris wants you to know that they've taken action. The airline understands that what happened was wrong, and they want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Ethan looked down at his hands, his fingers absently tracing the pendant. Will I get to try again? He asked, his voice hopeful but hesitant. Carla nodded, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Yes, sweetheart. They've offered you another chance to fly, with extra support to make sure you feel safe. And they want you to share your story, to help remind others to be kind and respectful. Ethan's eyes brightened, a small smile appearing on his face. Maybe I could help other kids who might feel nervous too, he said softly. Carla hugged him, her heart full of pride. You already are, Ethan. You're braver than you know. The night before Ethan's rescheduled flight, Carla packed his backpack with extra care, slipping in a new book and a letter from his grandparents, who were eagerly awaiting his arrival. She added a note of her own, tucking it into his pocket, where he would find it just when he needed a reminder of her love and support. The next morning, they arrived at the airport, where Daniel Harris personally greeted them at the check-in counter. He knelt down to Ethan's level, extending his hand with a warm smile. Ethan, it's good to see you again. Are you ready for your big adventure? Ethan nodded, a mix of excitement and nerves in his expression. Yes, sir. Thank you for helping me. Daniel smiled, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You're very welcome. And remember, you're not alone. We're all here to make sure you have a safe and enjoyable flight. We'll introduce you to the captain before you take off, and if there's anything you need, just let us know. With Daniel's reassurance, Ethan felt his confidence return. They headed toward the gate, where a friendly flight attendant named Lily greeted him with a warm smile, her expression full of encouragement. Ethan, I'm here to make sure you have a great flight today, Lily said, kneeling down to meet his eyes. I heard you're a bit of a flying expert. Maybe one day, you'll be my co-pilot. Ethan grinned, feeling his excitement return. That's my dream, he replied, feeling a spark of joy he hadn't felt since the first flight. Lily smiled, offering him a thumbs up. Well, you're off to a great start. If you need anything, just wave me over, okay? As they boarded the plane, Ethan's heart raced with excitement and pride. This time, he was ready. He felt surrounded by kindness and support, and he knew that he was about to embark on a journey he would remember forever. With his mom watching him proudly from the terminal, Ethan adjusted his backpack and took a deep breath. He was about to board his second flight, and although the memories of his last experience lingered, he felt a spark of determination. This time, he was ready to face the sky with the support of people who believed in him. As he approached the gate, Lily, the flight attendant from earlier, greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I hope you're excited for your flight today." Ethan nodded, feeling his confidence grow. "I am. Thanks for helping me." Lily winked. "It's my pleasure. Let's make this flight one to remember." Just before boarding, Daniel Harris approached him, accompanied by the plane's captain, Captain Reed, a tall man with a kind smile and a calm presence. Daniel introduced Ethan, who shook Captain Reed's hand with a sense of pride. "Ethan, I heard you're a future pilot," Captain Reed said, kneeling to meet Ethan's eyes. "It takes a lot of courage to fly solo at your age. How about we start your journey today with a tour of the cockpit?" Ethan's eyes lit up, his excitement erasing any lingering nerves. "Really? I'd love that." Captain Reed led Ethan to the cockpit, where the controls and screens gleamed with buttons and lights. He explained each instrument, showing him how the plane was steered and how the different dials worked to keep them safe in the sky. Ethan listened carefully, feeling like he was stepping into his own adventure story. "Think you could see yourself here one day?" Captain Reed asked, grinning. Ethan nodded, his voice full of excitement. "Absolutely. I want to be a pilot, just like my grandpa." Captain Reed placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "With your courage, Ethan, I have no doubt you'll be a great pilot. Now, let's get you settled for the flight." As he took his seat by the window, Ethan felt a sense of reassurance and joy that he hadn't experienced in his first attempt. The kindness and support from everyone around him made him feel like he belonged, like he was capable of handling whatever came his way. As the plane began to taxi, Ethan pressed his face to the window, watching the ground rush by and feeling his heart race with excitement. He'd imagined this moment so many times, but now he felt a new appreciation for the adventure. The fear that had clouded his experience before seemed distant, replaced by a growing confidence that he could do this. The plane picked up speed, and as it lifted off the ground, Ethan felt a familiar thrill as the airport fell away beneath him. He looked out at the clouds, the city below shrinking into a patchwork of buildings and fields. This was what he'd been dreaming of, the freedom of soaring through the sky, high above everything. Lily stopped by his row shortly after takeoff, offering him a snack and water with a kind smile. "How are you doing so far, Ethan?" He grinned, feeling a wave of pride. "Great. It's just like I imagined." She leaned in, her voice filled with encouragement. "Well, you're handling it like a pro. Remember, if you need anything, I'm here. Just give me a wave." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of comfort. For the first time, he was able to relax, fully embracing the experience without fear. He opened his backpack and took out his book on aviation history, settling in to read as he looked forward to reaching his grandparents' home. Halfway through the flight, Ethan noticed a boy around his age sitting across the aisle, glancing over curiously. He looked a little nervous, clutching his backpack and biting his lip as he stared out the window. Ethan remembered the anxiety he'd felt on his first flight and decided to offer a friendly smile. "Hi," he said quietly. "Is this your first flight too?" The boy nodded, looking a bit relieved to see a friendly face. "Yeah, I'm flying alone, just like you. I was kind of nervous." Ethan's heart swelled with empathy, and he leaned over, his voice steady. "I was nervous too, but it's actually really fun, and the people here are really nice." He gestured to Lily, who was busy helping other passengers, but always kept an eye out for them. The boy gave a small smile, visibly relaxing. "Thanks. I was scared about being alone, but I feel better now." Ethan felt a sense of pride. He realized that, in a small way, he was now helping someone else just like so many people had helped him. They chatted for a while about their favorite books and games, and Ethan felt a new level of confidence as he realized that he could make a difference, even in little ways. As the flight continued, he noticed other passengers glancing over with kind smiles and nods of encouragement. Some had clearly heard his story, and they seemed genuinely happy to see him enjoying his journey. Toward the end of the flight, Captain Reed's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to recognize a special young traveler with us today. Ethan Blake is flying solo for the first time to visit his grandparents. Let's give him a warm round of applause for his courage." Ethan's face turned red with surprise and happiness as the cabin erupted in applause. People clapped, some even cheering softly, and Ethan felt a wave of pride wash over him. The encouragement from the passengers around him made him feel strong, as if he could conquer any fear. A few people seated nearby gave him thumbs-up gestures, and the boy across the aisle looked at him with admiration. "You're like a hero," the boy whispered, grinning. Ethan chuckled, feeling both shy and grateful. "Thanks. I think you're pretty brave, too." With each clap, each smile, and each word of encouragement, Ethan's self-doubt faded, replaced by the realization that he could handle this adventure. He had overcome his fears, faced challenges, and even helped others along the way. As the plane began its descent, Ethan looked out the window, watching the cityscape below grow closer. His heart raced, but this time it was with excitement rather than nerves. He was moments away from seeing his grandparents and sharing the stories of his journey. When the plane landed and taxied to the gate, Ethan waited patiently, his backpack slung over his shoulder and his pendant resting against his chest. As the other passengers began to disembark, Lily stopped by his row, giving him a proud smile. "You did wonderfully, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Thank you for letting us be part of your journey." Ethan smiled back, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Lily. I'll never forget this." As he walked off the plane, several passengers waved goodbye, and he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had started this trip with hope and excitement, faced unexpected challenges, and had come through stronger on the other side. The entire experience felt like the beginning of something much bigger. In the terminal, Ethan scanned the crowd until he spotted his grandparents, their faces lighting up the moment they saw him. His grandma waved excitedly, and his grandpa's eyes sparkled with pride as they rushed over to embrace him. "Ethan," his grandma exclaimed, wrapping him in a warm hug. "We're so proud of you." Ethan hugged her back tightly, feeling a swell of joy. "I did it, Grandma. I made it." His grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder, grinning down at him. "I heard all about your adventure. You handled yourself like a true pilot. I can't wait to hear every detail." As they left the airport, Ethan felt like a weight had been lifted. He had faced his fears, stood up for himself, and gained a deeper understanding of his own resilience. He'd learned that bravery wasn't about never feeling scared. It was about moving forward despite the fear. That evening, he sat with his grandparents on their porch, watching the sunset and telling them about his journey. He shared everything, the kindness he'd received, the confidence he'd gained, and the friends he'd made along the way. His grandparents listened with awe, their pride evident in every word of encouragement. "We always knew you had a brave heart, Ethan," his grandpa said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You just proved it to the whole world." As he watched the stars appear in the darkening sky, Ethan felt a sense of peace and gratitude. This trip had shown him a new side of himself, one that was ready to take on the world. And as he looked to the horizon, he knew that this was just the beginning of the many adventures that lay ahead. In the days following Ethan's successful journey, Carla shared a heartfelt post on social media, recounting Ethan's bravery, the obstacles he'd faced, and the kindness he'd encountered on his second flight. She included a few photos of Ethan beaming beside Captain Reed and Lily, and her words conveyed a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude for everyone who had helped turn a difficult experience into a positive one. Within hours, Carla's post began to gain traction, with comments pouring in from friends, family, and strangers alike. Parents of young travelers expressed admiration for Ethan's courage, sharing stories of their own children's experiences flying solo. Some parents even reached out, sharing their appreciation for the way Carla and Ethan had handled the situation and thanking them for bringing attention to the importance of supporting young, unaccompanied passengers. Ethan was initially surprised by the response, but as he read the kind words and encouragement from people around the world, he felt a growing sense of pride. His story was making a difference. He hadn't just gone on an adventure. He'd inspired others to be brave and helped bring about real change. Later that evening, as Carla scrolled through the comments with Ethan beside her, she received a message request from a local news station. The message expressed interest in interviewing Ethan to share his story with a broader audience. Carla looked at Ethan, gauging his reaction. "What do you think, honey?" she asked, a gentle smile on her face. "Would you want to tell more people about your experience?" Ethan thought about it for a moment, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. But then he remembered the boy he'd met on the plane and how he'd helped him feel braver. Maybe sharing a story would help other kids, too. He looked up at his mom, his face determined. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I think I'd like to tell my story." The following day, Ethan and Carla arrived at the news studio. Ethan's heart thumped with a mixture of excitement and nerves as they walked past bright lights and bustling crew members. Carla gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze, whispering, "You're going to do great, Ethan. Just be yourself." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded, feeling his confidence grow. Soon, they were seated on a cozy set with a friendly reporter named Lena, who introduced herself with a warm smile. "It's so nice to meet you, Ethan," Lena said, her tone gentle and welcoming. "I've heard about your bravery, and I can't wait for you to share your story." Ethan relaxed a little, encouraged by Lena's kindness. As the interview began, she asked him about his first attempt to fly, how he'd felt when he was removed from the plane, and what it had been like to try again with the support of people like Captain Reed and Lily. Ethan answered each question honestly, sharing both his fears and the courage he'd found along the way. "What would you say to other kids who might be nervous about trying new things?" Lena asked, her voice filled with admiration. Ethan thought for a moment, then replied with a smile. "I tell them that it's okay to be scared. But sometimes being brave means trying anyway. And there are always people who want to help. You don't have to do it alone." Lena nodded, her eyes shining with admiration. "Thank you, Ethan. I think you're helping a lot of kids feel braver just by sharing your story." After the interview, Ethan felt a surge of pride as he and his mom left the studio. He'd taken something difficult and turned it into a message of encouragement. Carla hugged him tightly, her voice filled with pride. "Ethan, you're already making a difference." A few days after the interview aired, the airline released an official statement expressing gratitude to Ethan for his bravery and outlining their commitment to improving the experience for young travelers. They announced the launch of the Young Travelers Program, inspired by Ethan's journey, which would provide additional resources for children flying alone, including special training for flight attendants and dedicated support staff. In recognition of his courage, the airline invited Ethan to be the honorary Young Traveler Ambassador for the program, a role that would allow him to inspire other young passengers and share his story with the airline staff to emphasize the importance of empathy and understanding. When Carla shared the news with Ethan, his face lit up with excitement. "They really want me to be an ambassador?" he asked, hardly able to believe it. Carla smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes, sweetheart. You've shown everyone what it means to be brave, and they want you to help make flights safer and more welcoming for other kids." Ethan felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. His journey hadn't just been about his own adventure. It had become a way to help others feel confident and safe. He nodded, determination in his eyes. "I'd love to be an ambassador, Mom." A few weeks later, the airline invited Ethan and Carla to a special event celebrating the official launch of the Young Travelers Program. Daniel Harris welcomed them warmly, introducing them to other airline staff and families who had come to support the program. The room buzzed with excitement, and Ethan felt a mix of pride and nervousness as he prepared to share his story with everyone. When it was time for him to speak, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium, looking out at the crowd. He spotted his mom in the front row, her encouraging smile reminding him that he wasn't alone. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Ethan Blake, and I flew solo for the first time a few weeks ago. It was a little scary at first, but with the help of some really kind people, I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means trying anyway." He glanced at the children in the audience, hoping his words would reach them. "I want other kids to know that it's okay to feel nervous when you're trying something new. And I want to thank everyone here who helped make this program. It's important that kids like me feel safe and welcome, and I'm grateful to be a part of that." The audience erupted in applause, many people wiping away tears as they watched Ethan's sincerity shine through. Carla watched from the front row, her heart full of pride as she realized just how much her son had grown. Ethan wasn't just sharing his story. He was helping others find their courage too. Following the event, Captain Reed approached Ethan with a warm smile. "Ethan, it's good to see you again. I wanted to invite you and your mom to our flight training center. I think you'd love to see how pilots train, and maybe you'd like to try out one of our simulators." Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? I'd love that." Carla smiled, watching as her son's enthusiasm grew. She knew this was a dream come true for him, a chance to experience the world of aviation in a way that few people his age ever did. The following week, Carla and Ethan visited the airline's flight training center, where Captain Reed and Daniel Harris gave them a behind-the-scenes look at how pilots trained. Ethan was fascinated by the rows of simulators, each one designed to mimic the experience of flying a real plane. Captain Reed led him to one of the simulators, where he showed him how to control the various buttons and dials. Ethan's hands shook slightly with excitement as he took hold of the controls. With Captain Reed's guidance, he navigated the virtual plane, learning how to take off, adjust altitude, and make gentle turns. The experience felt surreal, and Ethan could hardly believe he was doing something he'd only dreamed of. Captain Reed chuckled, watching Ethan's intense concentration. "You're a natural, Ethan. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw you flying one of our planes one day." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. The journey he'd started with nervousness and uncertainty had become something extraordinary. He was no longer just a kid on a solo flight. He was a young adventurer, gaining confidence with each step. As the weeks passed, Ethan embraced his role as the young traveler ambassador. The airline featured his story in a series of videos designed to reassure young passengers, with Ethan offering simple tips on how to feel confident when flying alone. His gentle, reassuring words connected with children and parents alike, and the program received overwhelmingly positive feedback. Ethan recorded several short videos, sharing advice about preparing for a flight, bringing comforting items, and remembering that there were always people ready to help. The videos were shared across the airline's social media platforms, reaching families around the world who were moved by his bravery. Carla watched with pride as her son became a source of inspiration. She saw how each kind comment and each message of thanks filled him with confidence. Ethan's journey had become a powerful reminder of how one voice, no matter how small, could make a big difference. As the school year began, Ethan found himself eager to share his experiences with his classmates. During a school assembly, his teacher invited him to the front, encouraging him to talk about his journey. Ethan stood in front of his classmates, his voice steady as he shared his story. He described the challenges he'd faced, the fear he'd felt, and the courage he'd discovered. He spoke about how, with the support of others, he had turned a difficult experience into something he could be proud of. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is ask for help," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "And if you keep trying, even when things seem hard, you can turn your fears into something good." His classmates listened intently, some clapping as he finished. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that his story had reached others. He'd started his journey with a dream to see his grandparents, but he'd ended up discovering his own strength and inspiring others to find theirs. As he returned to his seat, his friends and teachers gave him high fives and words of encouragement. And as he looked around, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. He was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead, knowing that he had the courage to rise above any challenge. As Ethan entered high school, his passion for aviation only deepened. He spent countless hours reading about aerodynamics, aircraft design, and flight maneuvers, filling his notebooks with sketches and ideas. His room, once decorated with posters of superheroes, now featured photographs of historic planes, famous pilots, and a model of his favorite aircraft, a small replica of the same type his grandfather had once flown. Ethan's friends often asked him about his fascination with flying, some of them genuinely interested, while others teased him good-naturedly. But Ethan never minded. His love for aviation felt like more than just a hobby. It was a calling, something that brought him peace, excitement, and a sense of purpose. And as he grew older, his dream of becoming a pilot felt more attainable than ever. One Saturday afternoon, he and his grandfather visited a local airfield, where his grandpa had arranged for Ethan to meet Mr. Calvin, an experienced flight instructor who offered lessons to aspiring pilots. Ethan's eyes widened as they arrived, the buzz of small planes taking off and landing filling the air around them. "Ethan, this is Mr. Calvin," his grandfather said, introducing him to the instructor. "He taught me a few things back in the day, and I thought he could help you too." Mr. Calvin extended a hand, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "I've heard about your passion for flying, Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "Your grandpa tells me you're as dedicated as they come." Ethan shook his hand eagerly, barely able to contain his excitement. "Thank you, sir. I've dreamed of flying since I was a kid." Mr. Calvin nodded, gesturing toward a small training aircraft nearby. "How about we start with a tour? Every great pilot knows their plane inside and out." As Ethan followed him toward the aircraft, he felt a thrill of excitement and gratitude. His journey was far from over, and with his grandpa and Mr. Calvin's guidance, he felt ready to embrace each new challenge. After finishing high school, Ethan applied to several flight schools, his heart set on joining one of the top programs on the West Coast. His dedication and passion for aviation had paid off, earning him a spot in a well-regarded academy. When the acceptance letter arrived, Carla and his grandparents threw a small celebration, their pride in him evident in every smile, every cheer, and every hug. "You've worked hard for this, Ethan," Carla said, giving him a tight hug. "I know you'll be an amazing pilot. And remember, I'm just a phone call away." Ethan nodded, his heart full as he looked around at his family. "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done this without you." His grandpa gave him a playful nudge. "Just make sure you're as careful as you are brave, all right? You've got the heart of a pilot, but remember that skill comes from practice." Ethan grinned. "I promise, Grandpa. I'll make you all proud." Flight school was everything Ethan had dreamed of and more. His days were filled with classroom lessons on aerodynamics, navigation, and safety protocols, while his evenings were spent studying and preparing for the next day's challenges. But it was the time spent in the simulator and eventually in real planes that thrilled him most. During his first few months, Ethan made friends with other students who shared his passion. They studied together, swapping tips and insights, and encouraged each other during difficult tests and long study sessions. One friend, James, quickly became his closest companion. James was as dedicated as Ethan, and the two often found themselves discussing flight techniques, sharing dreams of one day flying for major airlines or even starting their own charter service. "Do you ever feel nervous before a flight?" James asked one evening as they sat outside the training center, watching a plane's lights fade into the night sky. Ethan thought for a moment, remembering his first solo flight to his grandparents. "I think it's normal to feel a little nervous," he replied. "But I also think that's where courage comes in. It's about trusting yourself and the training you've had." James nodded, clearly inspired by Ethan's words. "You're right. I guess a bit of fear keeps us sharp, makes us respect what we're doing." Their friendship and mutual encouragement helped Ethan navigate the intense demands of flight school. He knew he was on the right path, each lesson and challenge bringing him one step closer to his dream. One day, during a training session, Ethan was introduced to a retired commercial pilot named Captain Harris, a former colleague of Captain Reed who volunteered as a mentor for aspiring pilots. Captain Harris was known for his calm demeanor, his steady hand, and his reputation as a skilled and compassionate pilot. Ethan looked up to him immediately, sensing a familiar wisdom in his voice. After a few sessions together, Captain Harris invited Ethan to meet him in the simulator room for a one-on-one lesson. "Let's see how you handle some of the unexpected situations that come up in flight," Captain Harris said, smiling as he adjusted the simulator's controls. "A good pilot knows how to stay calm, no matter what." Over the next few hours, Captain Harris guided Ethan through a series of complex scenarios, simulating turbulence, sudden weather changes, and unexpected equipment malfunctions. With each scenario, Ethan's confidence grew, his movements becoming more precise and his decisions more instinctive. When they finished, Captain Harris patted him on the back. "You've got the makings of a great pilot, Ethan. Keep this up, and you'll do just fine." Ethan beamed, feeling more certain than ever of his path. Captain Harris's mentorship reminded him that flying was about more than technical skill. It was about staying calm, thinking clearly, and caring for those who depended on him. Near the end of his training, Ethan was scheduled for his first solo flight in a small, single-engine plane. The anticipation and excitement he felt reminded him of the day he'd flown alone for the first time to visit his grandparents. This time, though, he was at the controls, fully responsible for the plane and its journey. Ethan arrived early at the airfield, taking a few moments to walk around the plane, running through his pre-flight checklist and double-checking each detail. His heart pounded with a mix of nerves and exhilaration, but he took a deep breath, steadying himself with the familiar words his grandpa had once shared with him. "Trust in yourself and your training." As he climbed into the cockpit, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. He adjusted his headset, completed his final checks, and radioed to the tower. The green light came on, signaling that he was cleared for takeoff. With steady hands, he pushed the throttle forward, feeling the rumble of the engine as the plane picked up speed on the runway. The familiar thrill of leaving the ground filled him as he lifted off, watching the earth fall away beneath him. He soared through the sky, his movements precise, his focus unwavering. For the first time, he was truly flying alone, and he felt a profound sense of freedom and pride. This wasn't just a milestone. It was the realization of a dream he'd held on to since he was a kid. He glanced at the pendant his grandfather had given him, now safely tucked into his pocket, feeling its weight as a reminder of how far he'd come. The flight went smoothly, each moment reinforcing the knowledge and skills he'd gained over the years. As he brought the plane back down for a landing, his heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and joy. He knew that this was only the beginning, and that he was ready for the next step. After graduating from flight school, Ethan joined a regional airline, quickly building a reputation for his steady hand, calm demeanor, and respect for passengers. Over time, he became known not only for his skill, but for his kindness, his ability to make passengers feel safe, and his dedication to supporting young travelers. One day, while preparing for a flight, Ethan spotted a young boy boarding alone, clutching a small backpack and looking around nervously. The boy's face reminded Ethan of himself all those years ago, and he walked over with a warm smile. "Hi there," Ethan said, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "Are you flying solo today?" The boy nodded, looking both excited and a little scared. "Yeah, it's my first time." Ethan's smile widened, and he offered the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You're braver than you think. And don't worry, I'll be right here if you need anything. Just wave, okay?" The boy's face brightened, and he nodded, looking more relaxed. As Ethan returned to the cockpit, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He was living his dream, and now he had the chance to help others feel brave and confident in the skies. One evening, after a long day of flying, Ethan sat on the porch with his grandfather, watching the stars. The night was quiet, the air filled with a peaceful stillness that allowed Ethan's thoughts to drift. His grandpa took a sip of his coffee, glancing over at him with a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Ethan. You turned a difficult experience into a life's purpose, and I couldn't be prouder." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "It's funny, Grandpa. I thought flying was just about reaching places. But it's really about connecting with people, helping them feel safe, and seeing the world from a new perspective." His grandpa chuckled, giving him a pat on the back. "That's the mark of a true pilot. It's not just about where you go, it's about how you make the journey." As they sat together, watching a distant plane soar across the sky, Ethan felt a sense of peace. His journey had been filled with challenges, but each one had brought him closer to becoming the person he was meant to be. And as he looked to the future, he knew that the sky held endless possibilities, each one waiting for him to take flight. In the first few years of his career as a co-pilot, Ethan found himself constantly learning. Every day brought a new lesson in precision, responsibility, and the art of decision-making. Under the mentorship of seasoned captains, he developed his technical skills and learned the importance of clear-headed thinking, especially when facing the unexpected. Captain Reed, who had been instrumental in helping Ethan as a young traveler, occasionally checked in on him. They would catch up over coffee at the airport between flights, and Captain Reed offered guidance on everything from flight planning to managing the pressures of the job. One evening, after a particularly long day, Captain Reed looked across the table at Ethan with a knowing smile. "Remember, Ethan," he said, "flying isn't just about moving people from one place to another. It's about helping them feel safe, respected, and valued. A good pilot makes sure every passenger feels at ease." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of those words. His career was about more than his own love for flying. It was about his responsibility to each passenger. Every decision, every interaction was an opportunity to make a difference. On a flight from Seattle to San Francisco, Ethan found himself seated next to Captain Lydia Harmon, a respected senior pilot known for her calm and authoritative presence. Captain Harmon had heard of Ethan's story, and as they climbed to cruising altitude, she shared a few words of wisdom with him. "You have an unusual start to your career, Ethan," she said with a smile. "I've read about your journey. You know what it feels like to be vulnerable, to face challenges that feel overwhelming. Use that experience to understand your passengers. Make sure every flight is a safe haven for them." Ethan took her words to heart. As he interacted with passengers, he focused on building trust and empathy, just as Captain Reed and Daniel Harris had shown him. He wanted his passengers to know that they weren't just numbers in a seat. They were valued individuals, each with their own story, fears, and dreams. In time, Ethan became known for his steady demeanor and reassuring presence. He took a moment before every flight to greet the passengers warmly over the intercom, letting them know they were in good hands. One day, as he disembarked after a smooth flight, a mother with her young daughter approached him. The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes, clutching a small stuffed bear. "Thank you, Captain Ethan," the girl said shyly. "I was really scared, but then you talked, and it made me feel better." Ethan knelt down, smiling at her. "I'm so glad, and I'm proud of you for being so brave. Flying is an adventure, and you did wonderfully." The girl's mother smiled, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for taking the time. It really made a difference." Moments like these reaffirmed Ethan's purpose. He was reminded that even small gestures, a kind word, a friendly wave could ease fears and transform someone's journey. As Ethan's career progressed, he faced his share of unexpected challenges. During a flight on a stormy evening, he encountered severe turbulence over the Rocky Mountains. The passengers grew visibly tense, some gripping their seats, others exchanging worried glances. Captain Harmon was at the controls that evening, and Ethan observed how calmly she managed the turbulence. Her voice over the intercom was steady and reassuring, easing the passengers' fears. After the flight, she shared a critical piece of advice with him. "Turbulence, mechanical issues, storms, these are all part of flying," she said. "But as a pilot, your composure is what your passengers rely on. If you stay calm, they will too." Ethan understood then that flying wasn't just about handling technical challenges. It was about managing emotions, his own and his passengers. He practiced this lesson diligently, working to remain composed and confident even in the face of unpredictable situations. Each flight taught him that a pilot's responsibility extended far beyond the controls. As Ethan's reputation grew, he began receiving invitations from local schools and community centers to speak with young, aspiring pilots. He enjoyed these opportunities, seeing them as a way to give back and inspire the next generation of flyers. His story of overcoming fear, supported by kindness from people who believed in him, resonated with young audiences. Ethan smiled, remembering his early days. "Yes, Max, I was afraid the first time I flew alone, but I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going, even when things feel hard. And I had people who helped me find that courage." After the event, Max approached him, holding a drawing of an airplane. "I want to be a pilot one day, too. Just like you." Ethan knelt down, taking a closer look at the drawing. "I believe you can, Max. And remember, if you ever need help, don't be afraid to ask. There will always be people who want to help you. The moment reminded him of the encouragement he'd received as a young traveler, and he felt grateful to be part of the cycle, passing on the support that had once changed his own life. One summer evening, after a long day of flights, Ethan received a call from Daniel Harris. "Ethan, I have a surprise for you," Daniel said, his tone warm. "Remember Captain Reed?" Ethan's heart leaped at the mention of his old mentor. "Of course. I owe so much to him." "Well," Daniel continued, "Captain Reed's retiring soon. He'd love to take you on one last flight together, to show you just how proud he is of the pilot you've become." Ethan was speechless. The thought of flying with the captain who had first inspired him felt surreal. He accepted the invitation with gratitude, knowing that this would be an unforgettable experience. A few days later, Ethan met Captain Reed at the airport, feeling a wave of nostalgia as he shook his mentor's hand. Captain Reed looked at him with pride, his eyes twinkling. "I still remember that young traveler with the pendant," he said, chuckling. "You've come a long way, Ethan. Let's see what you've learned." Together, they prepared for a cross-country flight, with Captain Reed in the captain's seat and Ethan as his co-pilot. Throughout the journey, Captain Reed shared stories from his career, imparting final lessons about responsibility, kindness, and the unspoken bond between a pilot and his passengers. As they neared their destination, Captain Reed turned to him with a proud smile. "Ethan, remember that flying is a privilege. Treat it with respect, and always remember why you started." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of his mentor's words. As the plane touched down, he knew this was the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in his own journey. Captain Reed had passed down not only knowledge, but a legacy of empathy and courage. That evening, Ethan sat with his mom and his grandparents, recounting the flight with Captain Reed and sharing how much it had meant to him. His grandfather listened with a knowing smile, his pride evident. "Ethan, you've built something that goes beyond flying," his grandfather said. "You've shown others that kindness and courage can carry you through anything. That's a legacy to be proud of." Ethan looked out at the setting sun, a sense of peace settling over him. His journey had been filled with challenges and triumphs, each one shaping him into the pilot and person he was today. As he watched the last rays disappear below the horizon, he knew that his adventure had only just begun. Over the next few years, Ethan continued to embrace his role as a pilot, mentor, and advocate for young travelers. His story, once shared on a small scale, became part of the airline's training programs, used to inspire new hires and remind them of the importance of empathy. One day, Ethan received a letter from a young girl named Sophie, who had read about him in an article. Sophie, who was preparing for her first solo flight, thanked Ethan for his story, which had given her the courage to take on her own journey. "You taught me that being scared is okay," she wrote, "and that kindness can make a difference. Thank you for helping me believe I can do this." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth that no accomplishment or award could match. He had become part of a story larger than himself, and he knew that, through his work, he would continue to inspire others to find their courage. Ethan's career was thriving, and with each flight, he continued to build a reputation not just as a skilled pilot, but as a supportive and steady influence within the airline. His experiences had made him particularly attuned to the concerns of young passengers, and he often went out of his way to make them feel comfortable and safe. But as he settled into his career, Ethan realized that there was more he wanted to do. He wanted to teach. One afternoon, he was approached by Daniel Harris, who had remained a close mentor throughout Ethan's journey. "Ethan, I've been hearing incredible things about you from our passengers and your crew," Daniel said with a proud smile. "We've been considering starting a mentorship program to support new hires and inspire them with stories from experienced pilots. Would you be interested?" Ethan's face lit up with excitement. "Absolutely, Daniel. I'd love to be part of something like that. Mentorship has made all the difference for me, and I want to pass that on." As the mentorship program launched, Ethan found himself meeting with young pilots every month, sharing his story and encouraging them to find meaning and purpose in their work. During the program's first session, he addressed a group of newly hired pilots, all eager to learn and eager to prove themselves. Standing in front of the group, Ethan began with a quiet but sincere tone. When I was young, I thought being a pilot was only about flying. But I've learned it's about much more than that. It's about trust, kindness, and making sure every person feels safe in your care. He shared stories of his early days, from the struggles and triumphs of flight school to the lessons he'd learned from Captain Reed and Daniel. He described how each small act of empathy had shaped his journey and encouraged them to see their passengers as individuals, each with their own story and needs. One pilot, Amelia, approached him after the session. "Thank you, Captain Blake," she said. "I'm nervous about my first solo flight as a captain, but hearing your story makes me feel ready. You make this feel like more than just a job." Ethan gave her an encouraging smile. "You'll do great, Amelia. Remember, every flight is an opportunity to make a difference." In the months that followed, Ethan saw Amelia and other young pilots grow into their roles, each one carrying forward the lessons he'd shared. The mentorship program had not only strengthened the airline's team, but also deepened Ethan's own sense of purpose. Not long after the mentorship program's launch, Ethan received exciting news from the airline. He was being offered a position as a lead pilot for the international division. This new role would involve flying longer routes across continents, a dream he had held since his early days in aviation. The idea of flying internationally, visiting new countries, and experiencing different cultures filled him with excitement. He shared the news with his family over dinner, their faces lighting up with pride. "Ethan, that's incredible," Carla said, her voice brimming with pride. "I always knew you'd do amazing things, but seeing it happen is beyond what I ever imagined." His grandfather grinned, lifting his glass. "To Ethan, our very own globetrotter. We couldn't be prouder of the pilot and person you've become." As he prepared for his new role, Ethan knew this was both an exciting opportunity and a major responsibility. He would be representing not only his airline, but also himself and the values he held dear. He promised himself that no matter where he flew, he would carry with him the kindness, empathy, and sense of duty that had guided him thus far. Ethan's first international flight was scheduled for Tokyo, Japan. As he reviewed his flight plan and weather reports, he felt a thrill of anticipation. He had flown hundreds of flights by now, but this journey felt different. The route would be longer and more complex, and he would be crossing into new territories with new challenges. As he stood in the cockpit, going over the final checks with his co-pilot, he took a moment to look out over the airport, reflecting on how far he had come. This was the culmination of years of dedication, resilience, and support from those around him. As the plane took off, soaring into the clear sky, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had set his sights on the world beyond his hometown, and now he was on his way to explore it, taking with him every lesson, every encouragement, and every bit of wisdom he had gathered over the years. Landing in Tokyo was exhilarating. The bustling airport, the unique architecture, and the sea of unfamiliar faces reminded Ethan of his childhood fascination with new places and cultures. After the passengers disembarked, Ethan had the chance to meet some of the airline's local staff, who welcomed him warmly and offered to show him around. The airline arranged a tour of the city, where Ethan marveled at the mix of tradition and modernity. He visited temples, tasted traditional dishes, and learned about Japanese customs. Each experience filled him with a sense of connection, a reminder that aviation wasn't just about reaching destinations, but about bridging cultures and understanding the beauty of diversity. On his next flight to Tokyo, he noticed a group of young students from Japan on board, all of them traveling to the United States for a student exchange program. Remembering his own nervousness as a young solo traveler, he took a moment to introduce himself over the intercom, welcoming them warmly and sharing his excitement about connecting with different cultures. "Today, you're all adventurers," he told them, "and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Just remember, you're braver than you know." The students looked up, beaming with excitement and gratitude, and Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was more than a pilot. He was a bridge helping people connect across cultures, boundaries, and oceans. Flying international routes brought new challenges, from language barriers to complex weather patterns over vast oceans. One night, during a flight from Los Angeles to Paris, Ethan encountered severe turbulence over the Atlantic. His co-pilot looked over at him with concern, but Ethan maintained his calm, just as Captain Harmon had taught him years before. With a steady hand and a calm voice over the intercom, he reassured the passengers, explaining that turbulence was a natural part of flying and that they were in safe hands. His voice was firm but comforting, and as he glanced back at the cabin, he saw passengers visibly relax, some even closing their eyes to rest. After they safely landed in Paris, several passengers approached him, thanking him for his calm and kindness during the turbulent flight. One elderly passenger, who had been visibly frightened, shook his hand with a smile. "Thank you, Captain Ethan. You made me feel safe, even when I was scared." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude, knowing that his years of training and his focus on empathy had made a difference once again. These moments reminded him that each flight was a chance to provide reassurance, to be a source of stability for those who needed it most. After several months of flying international routes, Ethan scheduled a trip back home. His family had been following his travels closely, eagerly awaiting updates and sharing his stories with friends and neighbors. When he arrived, his grandparents greeted him with hugs and laughter, thrilled to have him home again. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Ethan shared stories of Tokyo, Paris, and the many places he'd visited. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and his family listened with awe, their pride for him evident. His grandpa, who had always been his biggest supporter, looked at him with a gentle smile. "Ethan, you're doing incredible things. But remember, it's not just about where you go, it's about how you get there and the impact you leave behind." Ethan nodded, touched by his grandfather's wisdom. His journey was about more than personal achievements. It was about the connections he made, the people he inspired, and the legacy of kindness he continued to build. Late that evening, Ethan sat on the porch with his mom, watching the stars and feeling the peace of being home. Carla looked over at him, her face filled with love and pride. "You've come a long way, Ethan," she said softly. "From that nervous boy on his first solo flight to a pilot exploring the world." Ethan took her hand, his heart full of gratitude. "Thanks to you, Mom. You always believed in me, even when things were tough." Carla squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "That's because I knew you'd find your way, Ethan. And I knew that kindness would always be at the heart of your journey." As they sat together, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude for every person, every moment, and every lesson that had shaped him. His career, once a dream, had become a lifelong journey, a chance to make a difference in the lives of others, just as others had done for him. Several months after Ethan's return from his first international flights, he received an invitation from the airline's executive team. They wanted to honor him for his contributions as a pilot and mentor, recognizing his impact on passengers and his dedication to fostering empathy and kindness within the airline. The event was held in a large hall filled with airline staff, executives, and families who had been touched by Ethan's work. As Ethan stood on stage to receive his award, he looked out at the crowd, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. He saw his mother, grandparents, and even Captain Reed and Daniel Harris sitting in the audience, their faces filled with pride. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan took a deep breath and approached the microphone, his voice steady. "Thank you," he began, looking around the room at the people who had supported him. "Flying has always been my dream, but it's the people I meet along the way who make it meaningful. I am who I am because of the kindness of others, and I hope to keep passing that on to every passenger and every young traveler I meet." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a sense of purpose like never before. His career had become more than just a job. It was a platform to inspire kindness, courage, and connection. With his growing influence, Ethan was invited to speak at aviation events and conferences aimed at young travelers and aspiring pilots. One day, he was asked to host a workshop at a large aviation expo where students from schools around the country gathered to learn about careers in aviation. As Ethan took the stage, he saw rows of bright-eyed students, each one looking up at him with curiosity and admiration. Many held notebooks, eagerly waiting to jot down any words of wisdom he shared. "Thank you all for being here," Ethan began, smiling warmly. When I was your age, I dreamed of flying, but I also had my fears. It was the kindness of others, the belief of my family, and the support of mentors that helped me reach this point. Today, I want each of you to know that no dream is too big if you're willing to work hard and support each other along the way. He shared stories from his career, recounting the lessons he'd learned from his mentors and his own experiences with passengers. At the end of his talk, he opened the floor for questions, eager to hear from the young audience. A girl named Ella raised her hand, her voice filled with excitement. "Captain Ethan, what's the most important thing to remember when you're trying to reach your dreams?" Ethan thought for a moment, then answered with a smile. "The most important thing is to stay true to who you are. There will be challenges, and sometimes things won't go as planned. But if you keep kindness at the center of everything you do, you'll not only reach your dreams, you'll make a difference in other people's lives along the way." Ella beamed, and Ethan could see the impact of his words reflected in her smile. He felt grateful for the chance to inspire others, just as he had once been inspired. Inspired by the positive responses from young travelers, Ethan proposed an idea to the airline, a mentorship program for kids interested in aviation. He envisioned an initiative that would allow students to shadow pilots, visit airports, and even experience flight simulators, giving them a first-hand look at the world of aviation. The airline embraced his idea, launching the Future Flyers program with Ethan as its ambassador. The program would host workshops, virtual sessions, and on-site tours, all designed to make aviation more accessible to young people. Ethan's first group of Future Flyers arrived at the airline's training center one bright Saturday morning, their faces filled with wonder as they took in the planes, simulators, and training facilities. He greeted each child warmly, feeling a deep sense of joy as he introduced them to the wonders of aviation. "Today," he announced, "you're all pilots in training. We'll learn about flying, explore the cockpit, and if you're up for it, take a turn in the flight simulator." The kids cheered, their excitement infectious. As they explored the training center, Ethan shared stories of his own journey, emphasizing the importance of perseverance and kindness in the world of aviation. By the end of the day, he could see that their dreams had grown brighter, their enthusiasm contagious. One boy, Lucas, approached him, eyes wide with excitement. "I didn't know flying could be like this, Captain Ethan. I want to be a pilot just like you." Ethan knelt down, meeting Lucas's gaze. "You'll be a great pilot, Lucas. And remember, every pilot needs a good heart and a steady hand. Keep learning, and one day, I'll see you in the cockpit." As the Future Flyers program grew, Ethan continued to balance his role as a mentor with his responsibilities as a pilot. With each flight, he encountered new challenges that tested his skills and resilience. On a long-haul flight from New York to London, he encountered a mechanical issue that required an emergency landing in Boston. It was the first time he'd faced such a situation as the lead pilot, and he felt the weight of his responsibility. Maintaining a calm demeanor, he communicated clearly with his co-pilot and the flight attendants, who reassured the passengers. He kept the tone of his announcement steady, explaining that they would be landing as a precaution and that everyone was safe. As the plane touched down safely in Boston, a wave of relief washed over him. After the passengers disembarked, he spent time talking to them, answering questions, and offering reassurance. One elderly passenger took his hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Captain Ethan. Your calm and kindness got us through a scary experience." Ethan felt humbled, realizing that leadership wasn't just about handling technical challenges, it was about maintaining trust and empathy, even in difficult moments. The experience reaffirmed his commitment to his passengers and to the principles that had guided him throughout his career. Ethan's dedication to kindness and leadership hadn't gone unnoticed. One day, he received an invitation to speak at a national aviation conference, where he would be addressing pilots, industry leaders, and aspiring aviators from around the country. The topic was empathy in aviation, the role of kindness in the skies. Preparing his speech, Ethan reflected on his journey, the mentors who had guided him, and the values he'd held on to through every challenge. He wanted to remind everyone in the audience that aviation was about more than just reaching a destination. It was about creating a positive experience for every person on board. When the day of the conference arrived, Ethan stood before the crowd, a mixture of nerves and gratitude filling him. He began by sharing his story, from his first solo flight as a young boy to the moments that had shaped him as a pilot. "Flying is a privilege," he said, his voice steady. "But it's also a responsibility. Each time we take to the skies, we have the chance to show kindness, to reassure, and to make each journey meaningful for our passengers. When we lead with empathy, we leave a lasting impact." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others visibly moved. As he finished, the room erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had taken a story of resilience and turned it into a message that could inspire an entire industry. Ethan's career continued to flourish, but his greatest joy remained the small, meaningful moments with his passengers and young mates. He saw each flight as an opportunity to leave a positive impression, whether through a kind word to a nervous passenger or a smile for a child traveling alone. One evening, as he prepared for a flight to Toronto, he noticed a young girl in the waiting area, clutching a small suitcase and looking around nervously. She reminded him of himself on his first solo flight, and he approached her with a gentle smile. "Hi there," he said softly. "Are you flying alone today?" The girl nodded, her eyes wide. "It's my first time." Ethan knelt to meet her gaze. "Well, I'm Captain Ethan, and I'll be flying the plane today. I promise you'll be safe, and if you need anything, just let the flight attendants know, okay?" The girl's face lit up with relief, and she nodded. "Thank you, Captain Ethan." As they boarded, she waved at him from her seat, her confidence restored. It was a small gesture, but to Ethan, it meant everything. He knew that his mission as a pilot went beyond skill and training. It was about creating a legacy of kindness, one flight at a time. As Ethan's career advanced, he continued to mentor, inspire, and embody the empathy he had come to value so deeply. His role with the Future Flyers program expanded, and he was invited to help design new initiatives aimed at fostering diversity and inclusion within the aviation industry. Reflecting on his journey, Ethan felt grateful for every person who had supported him, from his family and mentors to the passengers who had trusted him with their journeys. He knew that his story was just one of many, but he hoped that his dedication to kindness and empathy would continue to inspire those who followed. As he prepared for his next flight, a feeling of peace settled over him. The sky was vast and open, filled with endless possibilities. And as long as he was there, guiding others with compassion, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. With his career at an all-time high, Ethan felt a calling to give back in new ways. He had already dedicated time to the Future Flyers program, but he wanted to reach an even broader audience and make aviation accessible to young people from underserved communities. Inspired by his own story, Ethan proposed the Wings of Opportunity Scholarship to the airline's board, a program designed to support aspiring pilots who might not otherwise have the means to pursue a career in aviation. The scholarship would cover flight school tuition and living expenses for selected students, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent talented, passionate young people from taking to the skies. The airline approved the proposal enthusiastically, with Daniel Harris backing the idea fully. During the scholarship's launch event, Ethan addressed a crowd of potential applicants, their families, and supporters. "Flying gave me direction and purpose," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "This scholarship is about offering that same opportunity to all of you. I want each of you to know that your dreams matter, and with hard work and support, they're within your reach." As he looked out over the audience, he saw hopeful faces light up with excitement, and he knew the program would make a real difference. Ethan felt fulfilled, knowing that he was helping pave the way for the next generation of pilots. Not long after launching the scholarship program, Ethan reconnected with Captain Lydia Harmon, who had recently retired after a successful career in commercial aviation. The two had always shared a mutual respect, and Lydia's calm wisdom had been invaluable to Ethan throughout his journey. One evening over dinner, Lydia shared her interest in starting a nonprofit focused on aviation education for high school students. "I've been thinking about ways to introduce young people to aviation early on," Lydia explained. "Not just as pilots, but as engineers, air traffic controllers, and all the other roles that make flying possible." Ethan's eyes lit up. That's an incredible idea, Lydia. Let's join forces and make it happen. I know so many kids who'd love the chance to explore aviation, and showing them the variety of roles could open doors they never even knew existed. Together, they created Aero Pathways, a nonprofit that partnered with high schools to offer workshops, summer camps, and mentorship programs. Students from all backgrounds could explore careers in aviation, getting hands-on experience with simulators, engineering projects, and mentorship from industry professionals. The first Aero Pathways summer camp launched that June, with over 100 high school students attending from all over the country. Ethan was amazed by the level of enthusiasm from the campers, each one eager to learn and explore the world of aviation. The program featured sessions on everything from flight mechanics to the history of aviation, with each day ending in Q&A panels where the students could ask questions directly to pilots, engineers, and air traffic controllers. One day, Ethan gave a talk titled The Heart of a Pilot, focusing on the values he believed every aviator should have: courage, empathy, and a commitment to lifelong learning. He encouraged the students to view aviation as more than just a career, but as an opportunity to serve and uplift others. After his talk, a student named Jada approached him, her face full of excitement. "Captain Ethan, I've always wanted to be a pilot, but I didn't think it was possible for someone like me. Thank you for showing us that it is." Ethan felt a swell of pride. "Jada, you have everything it takes to make this dream come true. Remember, the sky has room for all of us. You just need to keep working toward your goal." As he watched the students engage with their projects and bond with one another, Ethan knew that Aero Pathways was fulfilling a vital need. Each of these young people was gaining skills and confidence that could change their lives, and he was honored to be part of it. Years passed, and Aero Pathways grew, expanding to new cities and attracting more students each summer. Ethan split his time between flying and working with the program, finding balance in both roles. The students' excitement, their dedication, and their growth became his inspiration, reminding him of his own journey and the importance of staying true to his values. He continued to receive letters and messages from former men's who had gone on to join the aviation industry in various roles, each one sharing stories of how Aero Pathways had changed their lives. These messages filled him with a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his work had created ripples of kindness and opportunity. One afternoon, Daniel Harris called him with news that the airline's board wanted to name a new training wing at the airline's headquarters after him in recognition of his contributions to aviation and mentorship. Ethan was deeply honored, but humbly suggested that it be named the Future Flyers Wing to celebrate the dreams of every young traveler and future pilot. At the dedication ceremony, Ethan shared a few words. "Every journey begins with a dream, and every dream deserves the chance to take flight. This wing is dedicated to all those who helped me find my way and to all of you who will come after. The sky is yours." On the anniversary of his first solo flight, Ethan took a day off to visit his family and reflect on his journey. As he sat with his mother and grandparents, reminiscing about the highs and lows of his career, he felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. His grandfather, now in his twilight years, placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've taken what we taught you and created something beautiful, Ethan. I always knew you'd do great things, but the kindness you've shown, that's what I'm most proud of." Carla smiled, her eyes misty with pride. "You're a testament to what compassion and resilience can do. You've given back to the world in ways I never imagined." Ethan took their hands, feeling grounded in the love and support they had always given him. "Everything I am, everything I've achieved, it's all because of you." As he looked out at the familiar landscape, he realized that he had come full circle. His career had been shaped by mentors, kindness, and courage, and he was grateful for each moment, each flight, and each person who had helped him reach this point. Years later, as retirement approached, Ethan found himself training a young co-pilot named Noah, who reminded him of himself, a bit nervous, but determined and passionate. During a long-haul flight, Noah shared his dream of becoming a captain and his admiration for Ethan's career. "Captain Ethan," Noah said, "I've read about you and your story. You've inspired so many people. I can only hope to do the same one day." Ethan smiled, feeling both humbled and grateful. "Noah, Remember that the best way to inspire others is by staying true to yourself and leading with kindness. Trust in your training and never forget why you started. As they completed the flight, Ethan felt confident that the next generation was ready to carry the torch. He had guided young aviators, empowered aspiring pilots, and left a legacy of empathy that would continue long after he retired. For his retirement, Ethan arranged a special flight with his family as passengers. His mother, grandparents, and a few close friends joined him on a flight to Hawaii, a destination they had all dreamed of visiting together. As he guided the plane through the clouds, he thought back on all the flights he'd taken, the lives he'd touched, and the impact he'd made. This flight felt like the culmination of his life's work, a personal farewell to the skies, shared with those who had always been his greatest supporters. Once they landed, his family embraced him, celebrating his incredible career and legacy. Ethan felt a mix of joy and bittersweet pride, knowing that while his time as a pilot had come to an end, the lessons he'd shared and the kindness he'd shown would live on in every life he had touched. After retiring, Ethan dedicated himself full-time to Aero Pathways, helping it expand nationally and even internationally. He spent his days guiding young people, mentoring future pilots, and working with partners to ensure that aviation remained accessible and welcoming to all. One morning, while leading a session with a group of new Aero Pathways students, he caught a glimpse of himself in their eager faces. He saw the same curiosity, hope, and courage that had once filled his own heart. He knew then that his purpose was still as clear as ever, to lift others, to empower them, and to keep the sky open for all dreamers. As he watched the students test out simulators and learn from their mentors, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had been a long one, filled with challenges, triumphs, and countless moments of growth. But now, as he stood on the sidelines, guiding a new generation, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Years had passed since Ethan's final flight, and although he was no longer in the cockpit, his legacy continued to soar. His impact was felt far and wide, from young pilots whose careers he had helped launch, to passengers who remembered the kindness of a pilot who made them feel safe, even on their most nervous flights. On a quiet autumn morning, Ethan sat on his porch, a warm cup of coffee in his hands. He gazed out at the rolling hills beyond his home, the golden leaves shimmering in the breeze, and he felt a deep sense of peace. Retirement had given him the chance to reflect, and each day, he was reminded of the journey that had shaped his life and the lives of those around him. Just as he took a sip, his phone chimed. It was a message from Jada, one of his former Aero Pathways students who had just completed her training with a commercial airline. She had stayed in touch over the years, keeping him updated on her progress, and today's message was filled with excitement. "Captain Ethan," the message began, "I'm officially a first officer. I couldn't have done it without you and Aero Pathways. Thank you for showing me that my dreams were worth pursuing. I'll carry your lessons with me every day I fly." Ethan smiled, pride swelling in his chest. Jada had once been a shy student with big dreams, and now she was a pilot, ready to carve her own path through the skies. He felt humbled by her gratitude, knowing that his work had helped her reach her goals. Later that afternoon, Ethan received an invitation from the airline for a reunion of future flyers and Aero Pathways alumni. The event would bring together former Mints, now pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals who had been part of the programs he had championed. The reunion was held at the airline's headquarters, in the very wing that had been dedicated to the Future Flyers program. Ethan was greeted by familiar faces and new ones alike, all gathered to celebrate the impact of the programs he had helped create. As he walked through the crowd, he was approached by Max, the young boy he had encouraged so many years ago, who was now an airline pilot himself. "Captain Ethan," Max said with a wide grin, "you probably don't remember, but you once told me that bravery wasn't about never feeling scared. It's about trying anyway. That advice got me through flight school, and now I'm flying because of you." Ethan chuckled, placing a hand on Max's shoulder. "I remember, Max. And look at you now, you've become the kind of pilot I always knew you'd be." Throughout the evening, former students and Mints shared stories of how Ethan's mentorship had shaped their lives. They spoke of his compassion, his guidance, and the kindness he had shown them, even in their most uncertain moments. Ethan listened with a full heart, realizing that his legacy had taken on a life of its own, carried forward by each person he had touched. The airline CEO took to the stage, inviting Ethan to join him at the podium. As the room filled with applause, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his life's work settle around him like a comforting embrace. "Thank you all," he began, his voice steady. "I've spent my life in love with the skies, but it's each of you who made my journey worthwhile. If I've taught you anything, I hope it's that no matter where you go or what you do, kindness and courage will always be your greatest strengths. The sky is a big place big enough for all our dreams, and I'm honored to have shared this journey with you." As he looked out over the room, he saw not only his own legacy, but the beginning of countless others. Each person in the room carried with them a spark, a purpose, and a shared dedication to making aviation a field of opportunity, safety, and empathy. Returning home that evening, Ethan sat once more on his porch, this time looking up at the night sky. The stars were bright, stretching endlessly across the heavens, reminding him of every flight, every journey, and every story that had brought him to this moment. He closed his eyes, feeling the memories wash over him: his first solo flight, the kindness of strangers, the guidance of mentors, and the countless lives he had helped lift up. He knew that while his time in the cockpit was over, his legacy was just beginning, carried forward by each person he had inspired. As he sat beneath the vast sky, he felt at peace, knowing that he had lived a life full of purpose, love, and compassion. And in that quiet moment, with the stars as his witnesses, he understood that his story was part of something greater, an unending journey of dreams taking flight, each one soaring higher than the last. Thank you so much for joining us in Ethan's story, a journey of courage, kindness, and resilience. If you enjoyed this tale and want to experience more stories that inspire and uplift, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you meaningful stories that remind us all to dream big and lift each other up. Let us know in the comments what part of Ethan's journey inspired you the most. And as always, thank you for watching. See you in the next story.